Emily Dickinson is my favorite poet. She was as close to the American Shakespeare as you could get, perhaps without speaking of Whittier or Poe or Walt Whitman. At any rate, she was born in 1830 to a fairly wealthy upper-crust family in Amherst, Massachusetts. She went to Amherst College, and she went to Mount Holyoke College for a while. Other than that, we know she made one trip to visit her father in Washington, D.C., who was a United States congressman, and that was about it. She spent much of the rest of her life as an adult in her home and more particularly in her bedroom. Her joy was writing about some of the deep-seated feelings that she had in her prose. She didn't publish it. Friends published about 7 poems during her lifetime, and she loved to write prose. She wrote about the things that meant the most to her, which were life and death type issues. And she very reverently included references to Jesus Christ and to the scriptures, the Bible she was raised on. She had deep-seated convictions, and this led to her writing some of the greatest prose poems in the English language since William Shakespeare. At any rate, it was during her lifetime that she wrote a poetry which was very unique for the era in which she wrote. They contained short lines, typically lacked titles, and often used slant rhyme as well as unconventional capitalization and punctuation. Many of her poems are written in pencil. There are a few in ink. I have brought today one of her ink poems, which she gave, you can see, to a friend. It had some crocuses that were put in with the letter, and you can see the what was left from her garden, as she wrote to her friend. She publishes her poems by sending them to friends, and there are only just a handful that were published in her lifetime by those friends, and very often they would change the typing and so on, and the unusual way she wrote when they published them, because editors weren't used to that. She was the first of really the modern world poets in America in many ways. Her poems were gathered after her death. She died at a relatively young age of 56 in 1886. In fact, during her lifetime, the family held one famous family get-together, the family Dickenson reunion, and this is the ribbon they all wore. I don't know whose this was, but I've ended up with quite a bit of material. I was head of the Emily Dickinson Society of Utah back in 1995 through 1997. And it was a very interesting period to be involved with her, because there was a famous Mark Hoffman forgery that came for sale during that period. But that's another story for another time. Anyway, the point was that Emily Dickinson wrote beautiful poems, and her family found 1,776 poems after her death in her bureau. And they were tied together like facils with string. And she'd sewn them together. And they were first started to be published in 1890. They only did 480 copies of this book, so it's fairly rare. And it's poems by Emily Dickinson. It came out in 1890. And a few years later, they came out with a second series of poems, and then finally a third series came out in the 1890s. They were all within a couple of years of each other. They're all quite rare today. And at any rate, they were not that highly thought of at the time. There wasn't a huge audience for her poetry at the time. It gradually grew over time. There's only one known photograph of her for sure, and it was taken at a very young age. I have a couple of her letters as well. One of them is quite interesting. You can see the structure by my reading it. It says, "How dare a tear intrude in so sweet a cheek? Gentlest of neighbors, recall the sparrows and the great logician. Tenderly, E. Dickinson." This was done for the wife of the postmaster who lived across the street from the beautiful Dickenson family home, which has now been turned into a Emily Dickinson museum there in Amherst. She didn't spend a lot of words to get the meaning across. She was brilliant that way. And it was amazing that she lived a life that most people were not acquainted with her or her work while she was living. And I have another letter of hers. It's a little longer. It was also written in the 1880s. This is one that was written to Mrs. Samuel Mack, and it's a three-page letter written on some stationery, and again, it's all written in pencil in her beautiful tiny script. This particular letter is to dear Mrs. Mack. Will forgive us for not yearning to see her, but for not succeeding. While there is life, there is interview. Seems almost inevitable, though in sacred instances it is sometimes not so. We shall never forget you. Your loveliness is legend, rebateless as the babes in the wood. While you live, you will be, dear Mrs. Mack, the angel of childhood. I have not been strong for the last year. The dyings have been too deep for me. And before I could raise my heart from one, another has come. And I fear I might not have dared to see you, even could you have come. But fidelity never flickers. It is the one unerring light. A word from you would be very dear, but if too much to ask, deny your faithful Emily. She says so much in so few words. Truly a giant in American literature that was unknown during her lifetime.